Cool. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about building blazing fast websites with Gatsby and Decoupled Drupal. So who here first has tried out Gatsby before in one guise or another? Okay, so like half-ish the crowd. Cool. So yeah, some of you are familiar with what I'm going to be discussing then. So a bit about my background. I, in college, did a lot of Drupal freelancing, and then went so far as to make a Drupal distro back in the good old days, 2008. And then worked at Pantheon. I was there early, 2012, 2014. So if you've used the dashboard, I was like the first front-end hire, so kind of all the dashboard stuff, I worked on that. Some of my code still lingered on 5 years later after I've left. And yeah, and then since then did some very startup stuff. And then, actually I took a slide away. Actually, now I want. Anyways, and then 5 years ago, well, 4.5 years ago or so, I started Gatsby as I'd gotten into React early, and I wanted a web framework to use with React to build websites, kind of like I did with Drupal. And the goal of Gatsby is, both the open source project and the company, is to reinvent the web to make it fast and secure by default. And a lot of websites that you've probably visited are built with Gatsby now. So the React docs are built with Gatsby, possiblefoods.com, and there's hundreds more you can check out in the showcase. So then a year and a half ago, I guess now, with my co-founder Sam Bhagwat, we founded a startup to help grow Gatsby. And there's a lot of really great OSS companies that come out in the last few years: Elastic, Confluent, HashiCorp, etc. Like Acquia is another from the Drupal community, Pantheon, WP Engine, Automatic. All these companies, they provide kind of a business model around driving the open source project forward. And so our goal is to build a tremendous, very dynamic OSS ecosystem, and combine that with powerful cloud services with tens of thousands of customers. And we have our first product, Gatsby Preview, is now in open beta, which is exciting. And our team is distributed, so this is we have gatherings a few times a year, and this is some of the team. This is from a year ago, so it's bigger now. But anyways, it's the coolest photo we have, so I'm showing it still. Anyways, so it's a real pleasure to work with them on the project. So we're working on reinventing the web, but why? A big part of it is just that the web is 20 plus years old. It's everybody's on the internet. Everyone's on their smartphones, desktop. There's all sorts of services, consumer, enterprise, et cetera, and it's an extremely competitive space. Like if you're a small business and you're in Atlanta, you only have to compete with people in Atlanta. But if you're on the internet, you have to compete with anyone, anywhere in the world, which just means that expectations are very high and there's a lot of noise, and to stand out, your stuff has to be great. And clients are coming to you with kind of expectations driven by things that they're experiencing and seeing and using. And so they look at all these different amazing websites out there, and that's kind of like what plays into the expectations that they have for what we deliver them. And yeah, more and more people expect like kind of app-like experiences from the web that are like blazing fast and really interesting and so forth. And to deliver on that, like the front end is being forced to become more complex. It's like what used to be fairly straightforward, some HTML, some CSS, some layout, a bit of color. As long as it was like reasonably good, that was like kind of state of the art. But today, it's the expectations again are much higher. And to kind of like accomplish this, the web development community is more and more turning towards React and other similar type web frameworks to deliver on kind of the growing expectation for performance, for digital experiences. And you can see that like if you go to Indeed.com, it's like a popular job search tool. There's like 18,000 jobs open for like React developer engineer. And then Drupal, is 1,300, which is, by the way, a very respectable number. I've looked at a whole bunch of different technologies, and that's like median, I guess. So Drupal still has a ton of jobs, but React just by itself, I kind of like, if you combine every PHP-based technology, it adds up to something like 18,000 as well. So it's like React by itself is like as big as the entire PHP community. And it's only in the last like React is like 5 years old and really only kind of took off in the last like 3 years. So it's just like a very huge shift that's happening towards these kind of JavaScript powered front ends. Because again, like that's kind of the next wave for building stuff. Yeah. And so Gatsby's goal is like React kind of came out of like the app world. Like people are like, oh, like we're doing these, SaaS apps or kind of flashy media things or whatever. But the advantages of React are just as strong for kind of other types of websites. And the goal of Gatsby is to combine, React with kind of the CMS world and kind of create a happy marriage. And as I'll get to in a bit, Gatsby works with a number of backends, so Drupal included. So you can like take Drupal plus Gatsby and make React-driven websites. So what are some things that make Gatsby different? One of our mottos is just like fast in every way that matters. We put a lot of attention into kind of developer experience and the site speed and so forth. And it shows in the performance of the sites. If you like Tolstoy, you might recognize my mangled quote that fast websites are all like every slow website is slow in its own way. And the meaning of which is that there's only so many things you can do to like there's kind of like a fairly standard ways of making your website fast. And most frameworks, you just sort of like repetitively implement those things every time. You're like, okay, like check our CSS, inline it as much as possible, use some sort of critical CSS thing, optimize the images, cache as much of stuff on the edge, deliver it on a CDN, yada, yada, yada. And the goal of Gatsby is to just kind of incorporate that all into the framework so that you don't have to like think about making your website fast, it just happens. So we kind of think of it as like a website compiler in the sense of, you're not writing like assembly or C and like hand tuning memory management and other stuff like that. You're writing like Python, and then it just has built-in memory management, and you don't really have to think about that. The same sort of way with like performance, it's like you write React components, and then we compile that down to HTML and CSS and JavaScript that's fast as possible. And we kind of do a bunch of stuff behind the scenes to make sure that like whatever's happening, the site is fast. So we kind of like flip the, you have to work hard to make your site fast to you have to work hard to make your site slow. Though it is possible, I've seen it, but it is, generally speaking, Gatsby sites are fast, and people are like, we didn't do anything. It was just fast. So it's great. And a big part of this too is just it's just kind of like Gatsby's caching story is pretty unique in that you don't have to have like a running service to run your site. So like Drupal and other type stuff, you have like running servers, web servers that like handle requests, and then it tries to like keep up with the cache, but that leads to times when the cache gets invalidated and then things get slow while the cache is being rebuilt and so forth. Where with Gatsby, like we build the cache at kind of like a build step and then push it out to a CDN, which means that you don't ever have a running service. You don't need a running service in production. And it also just means that like the cache is like baked into the implementation. And so it's a lot more robust, I guess, than sometimes other services. So a kind of example of this is like Flamingo is like a new women's shaving brand that launched late last year. And we did a case study with them. And on launch day, they had like 10x more traffic than normal. And they didn't like, there's just like nothing that changed because it was, all the traffic is being served by the CDN. And so they didn't have to do anything special. So another thing that distinguishes Gatsby is support for the content mesh. And one of our kind of theses is that monolithic CM applications are being replaced by modular specialized content systems, which means that instead of having like one CMS, one kind of like system that drives the entire website, instead you're kind of composing together multiple best of breed systems to build the site. And the advantage is that, it's just like, it can be a lot faster and simpler to have kind of like these specialized tools that do their one thing very, very well versus, hoping that like this Drupal module that does this odd thing is like good enough. Because it's sort of a one tool that's serving everyone versus one module that serves a subset of one community type thing. The first, the kind of more specialized tool is just going to be, much better, generally speaking. And Gatsby, and so this kind of like may sound complex. You're like, okay, you have all these different things going. Like, how do you pull them all together? And Gatsby has like a plugin system, which kind of does that integration work. So it's generally fairly straightforward to plug in multiple systems and make things work together. So this is kind of another way of visualizing that, where you can have all these different services. They all kind of combine in Gatsby. Gatsby integrates it, builds the sites, and pushes it out to the CDN. You can think of it as like the glue for the content mesh. Another thing that distinguishes Gatsby is it's optimized for change. So, I mean, if you worked on any project for more than, say, 6 months, you know that like the requirements keep changing. The company's changing. Like, you learn new things as you ship things. You're like, oh, we should actually do this differently or whatever. And so what what this project starts at is not going to be what it's going to be in 6 months, a year, 2 years, etc. So kind of an illustration of this is like, say, like follow the life the life of a startup, the website life of a startup. So when it starts, it might have a very simple one-page site that's just like pure HTML at startup.com. But then they launch an app at app.startup.com. And then as they grow up, they're like, oh, we hired a marketer. They don't want to edit HTML. So we have to put up some sort of like CMS/blog or whatever. And then you have yet another subdomain. Then you add docs, and the engineers want to use Markdown to maintain the docs. And that goes at like docs.startup.com. And it started as kind of like a simple web property turned into a mess of domains and kind of technologies. The lesson here is that as you pick a technology, like oftentimes that'll work for what it's intended, but then as things change, like you either are forced to pull in other technologies or kind of do awkward stuff to make it work. But it'd be obviously nicer if like all these different sites were just one site, and you can have kind of like a shared technology stack and dev prod workflow for making changes to any of them. And that's the goal of Gatsby with kind of the content mesh, is that it's like what you need from the front end is often the same across all these different things. Whether it's like you're showing documentation or a blog or marketing pages or whatever, like the components you use, the styles you use, etc., are much more similar than what the backend should be. Like how do you want to maintain the content is not necessarily how you want to like display the content. And so in the Gatsby world, in that same scenario, you could like start with a very simple Gatsby site, but then when you have a blog, you could plug in like Drupal or WordPress to like maintain the blog, and then the docs could just be like a Markdown repo in GitHub that the engineers are maintaining, and so on and so forth. And like Gatsby flexibly kind of incorporates more and more kind of backends as you need to plug them in as the site grows. Yeah. So why is Gatsby great for Drupal? So these are a few challenges that many of you might be familiar with, like Drupal. So resourcing skilled Drupal engineers is becoming difficult, both for front end and back end. Maintainability challenges and kind of integration challenges. So it's like as requirements change, how do you plug those into Drupal? Can be a challenge. Dries touched on this on talking about like why decoupled Drupal is that finding Twig developers can be difficult, and then if you move to JavaScript-driven front end, it's easier to find developers who have experience with those. Also, it's a great fit because JSON API is now in Drupal core, so that's how Gatsby talks to Drupal, is through the JSON API. So now any Drupal 8.7 install, you can just install the Gatsby Drupal plugin and then immediately start, building a Gatsby Drupal site. And also there's more and more kind of like Drupal people building Gatsby websites. So we have this Gatsby source Drupal, which is kind of the heart of the integration. That's weird. And then there's also, so some folks from Third and Grove and Media Current have been collaborating on this Gatsby live preview, which I'll demo later, but that's kind of also a key part in making the integration really smooth. Media Current also has their Drupal 8 distro, and they have kind of documentation about how to use that with Gatsby. We know also has a Drupal Gatsby distro. So I'm not really sure how to pronounce this. Boina, maybe? Who knows? Anyways, so it has a Drupal distro and then a Gatsby theme that ties together, the two together really nicely. And also I feel like, I kind of grew up in open source web development in the Drupal community. And so a lot of what I know about like open source communities I learned through Drupal stuff. And so try to pattern how Gatsby works after that. And just having like a very, kind of passionate and helpful community where people like help each other. And so I feel like there's a lot of similarities between the two. Yeah, kind of covered that already. So interesting advantage too of Gatsby, when you move to like from Drupal, straight Drupal to Gatsby plus Drupal, is the development workflows can get quite a bit more efficient. Because with Drupal, like everything is like connected. And so if your backend isn't ready, it's hard to start working on like the front end templates, because you need both of those working at the same time. But with Gatsby and Drupal, they're disconnected. So you can like easily mock up what the backend would look like while that's being worked out. And then you can start working on the components and pages with kind of mocked up data. And so that kind of eases a lot of friction in doing site builds. So this kind of illustration is like, you can agree on like a dummy API. So you're like, these are the different data types, and this is roughly the structure, and then start being built on that. And then like as things change, like both sides could be adjusting, and then eventually you converge at a real API. And what's cool with Gatsby is because it's so, it is like really flexible swapping out stuff. Like you really, you switch from like a dummy API to a real API, it's almost no work at all. Yeah, another great thing is that, you just have a lot more flexibility to kind of like, again, like plug in best of breed tools. So you're building like a Drupal Gatsby site and you're like, oh, the client wants e-commerce to sell a few things. Like adding Shopify, for example, where they can like manage their products and like do the sales, literally it could take like a day or so, because, Gatsby has a really nice integration with Shopify, and it's not too much work to plug that in. And so, a lot of these kind of unexpected requirement changes are handled pretty easily. I was also just kind of joking around earlier. It's like, it'd be kind of funny too to have like a Drupal and WordPress Gatsby site, sort of a, cats and dogs sort of all play nice to each other. But it sounds weird, but in a way it kind of sounds nice, because what if you go to like you're working with an organization and they're, they have kind of this legacy WordPress site that's been around forever, running their blog, but then they want you to redo a bunch of other stuff. Like you could just keep things in WordPress, like all the people writing blog posts, like okay, just stay there, and then manage all this other content in Drupal, and then Gatsby just sort of consumes both of them, and like it works just fine. Actually, cool. So let's do some demo. So I wanted to show off a few things. So, so this is so Gatsby has this idea of starters. So when you first install Gatsby, it's like a node CLI, and then you can start sites from all these different starters, and there's like 260 here. Anyways, we have a few default ones, so I'll show that off first. So this is the starter blog. And it's like kind of a markdown blog. And this is like the front page. You can click to the link. You see the blog post. It's very simple. It's intended to be a starting point. Add your own styles, customize it to your needs, and so forth. And then here it's running locally in my terminal. And so if I open up a new one, one cool thing about Gatsby is like development is, like we say, like fast in every way that matters. So one of the ways that fast speed really matters is just sort of development. So if you open up like the front page index, for example, and this is a React component. And so if you say, what should I change? So you could be like, add something to the header. I am adding something to the header. And then you save that. Then, oh, that's, wait a second. Oh, let me do it here. Anyways, okay, so there, it's like added immediately. There's no refreshing. You remove it, and it's gone within like a second. And so, anyways, it makes for a very fluid development environment. So you can just be like running around changing stuff. So similar sorts of things. So it's like post mapping. So this is the different post that it's rendering out. So we could say, we want, this to be color red or whatever. And then it's red. You're like, I don't like red. Like with hot reloading, it's like I used to do a lot of like DevTools stuff, like changing styles in DevTools. But with this, it's like changing styles is so fast that I just do it right in code oftentimes. Anyways, and then so Gatsby has this this source pages, so you can like add individual pages, and then you can also like generate pages from your content. So each of these are generated from a Markdown file, and then there's a blog post template component, and so this is the component that modifies this, and then we can say similar sort of thing, like I don't know, hello Atlanta shows up. Anyways, so interesting part two about Gatsby is it's based around GraphQL. Who here has used GraphQL actually, by the way? Okay, so yeah, 20%ish of you. So so each component can have a GraphQL query at the bottom, like that. And so like the different parts of the page are queried. So you can say like Markdown remarks. So this is like, it's like saying select a Markdown file and then get an excerpt, get the HTML for the body, and then get like the title and the date and then the description. And so you can see it, there's this like IDE for querying Markdown. And so you can like just go in here and say, I want to get the title of every Markdown post, and it generates this query, you run it, and then voila, you have that. You could also say, I want to get like, the description if it's available, and whatever. Cool thing too is that if you look here, you can pass arguments to some fields. So the date field, you can like have like a format string, so you can like format the date. So if you look back here, it's like, there, and then we say, okay, let's like change the formatting. Oh, May's the same either way. Well, that's useless. Let me look at a different one. Oh, they're all May. Okay, so if we change this to, I think this would do it. Okay, yeah, so now it's like a single date instead of always padded. And then we changed it to, it goes back to 0, 1. Anyways, so yeah, so it's the same sort of like hot reloading idea of like, like picking up data and changing it, and then you can like update the code here too as you want. So yeah, we look at another demo is, so Gatsby has a bunch of like kind of example sites showing Gatsby being used with like different sources or demonstrating different like styling techniques and so forth. So this is one I built based around Drupal in the Unami example distro. And so similar type of thing, it's pulling in data from Drupal and like kind of rendering them here. And you kind of click around. And then if we look at the code there, oops, it's like, actually that's not work. So it has again like the source pages directory. So this is like the front page. Has a query. This one's a little bit more complex because it's getting like featured ones and then like whatever. Another interesting thing too to note here too is that you can like query images. So it has kind of like built-in image optimization. So you can say, I have a, so on the Drupal node, there's an image attached to it. You can say, I want to query that and get like a 400 pixel version of that. And then at build time, it'll like kind of resize the image and optimize it for you automatically. So that's pretty nice. But you could say, for example, so this is like the next 2 promoted recipes. You could say, I want to change this to 200 by 200 instead of 240 by 240. And then I think that's the change. Yeah, so you can see it like changing sizes, which is great anyways, because then yeah, so like if the designer's like, hey, I just changed the whole design across the whole site, and a whole bunch of things change, you just go through and kind of like fiddle with the queries, and then it updates automatically. Anyways, cool. And then actually, let's jump back to the slides. Okay, so what's next for Gatsby and Drupal? One big thing we're working on improving is build time. So Gatsby has like a build step. It's similar to like if you use static site generators before. It's similar in some ways to those, in that we build your site. And one kind of fairly obvious problem that comes from that is that what if build times get slow? What if you have an enormous site and it kind of gets obnoxious waiting for the site to go live? And so most mini Gatsby sites are pretty speedy to build, but we're working to bring that down because again, the faster builds get, the more people can use Gatsby. And so one thing we're doing as a company is we're creating a cloud build service so that you can just point your site to it, and then we'll do a lot of fancy kind of distributed computation magic to kind of split up the build and make it really, really fast, regardless of how large it gets. And our goal is to average sub-second build times for almost any data change, so that the goal is basically that like Drupal and Gatsby, you can like click save, and we can actually just wait for the build to finish, and then it just sort of like redirect to the now live page that they're editing type thing, which would then make it sort of feel invisible. Like there's no difference between kind of a regular site and something built like this way. We're talking to different Drupal folks, and kind of the promise here is that if we can get the integration so seamless and have the builds fast and have good preview experience and so forth, that the integration is going to be so good that you can go decoupled Drupal by default and kind of get all these advantages, and then that content authors won't like really even see a difference between how they experience it now. Another thing that we're working on too of interest is themes, and Gatsby themes are a really revolutionary feature. We have a number of people working full time on them, and the idea is that you can like kind of package up and ship like building blocks for a site. So you can have like a blog, and anytime you want to blog, you just install that theme, and any site will just sort of like add a blog to that site. And what's interesting is that, unlike normal themes, which are just sort of like horizontal composition, like you just kind of add it on, it takes over the site. The idea is that you can have a bunch of themes that are like kind of horizontally composing together. So like a blog, an e-commerce, docs, etc. And then all these can just kind of like own different sections of the site. So yeah, if you want kind of a code version of that is like kind of like pass into your site function, these different themes, and out pops the site. Anyways, there's a lot of interesting possibilities with that. So like as an organization, you could have like a base theme that kind of has like a bunch of starter components and styles and so forth that every project uses those, and then that's like the basis of all your site. And then if you ever like update something or fix a bug, whatever, you can like easily deploy it across all your sites without any difficult. The same thing with like you build a lot of organizations want blogs, and so you just have kind of a standard blog, and anytime you need to add a blog to a site, pop it in, 2 hours later you're done or something. There's quite a few people are using it. Apollo, which like GraphQL tooling company, all their doc sites are now based on a single Gatsby theme. And so rolling out a new site, it's just like install the theme, add some markdown files, and voila. And then European Greens, an agency in Netherlands, I think. Anyways, they kind of handled building all the different sites for all the politicians running, and they used a single theme to kind of build all those out. And they said elsewhere that it was just like lightning fast to kind of roll out a new site. Also of interest is Grant from Third and Grove has been working on a kind of a Gatsby Drupal theme, where the idea is to make it really easy to scaffold out a new site. So you can install it, and then it immediately just sort of like detects all of your different Drupal entities, and then kind of like helps you create page components, like template components for each entity. So you can say, like, okay, here's all my content types, and then just like immediately just starts building out the different page templates for those. That's kind of a really interesting approach. And then, yeah, so Gatsby is widely used. We have 35 people working at Gatsby Inc. There's several thousand people who've contributed to the open source project and growing. So it's a very active project, and yeah, we're reinventing the web, and we'd love to have you be part of it. So there's like 5-10 minutes left for Q&A, if anyone wants to ask questions.
Yeah. I noticed that when you were doing a demo of Gatsby talking to Drupal, it was still using GraphQL. Are the GraphQL queries being compiled into JSON requests or something else entirely?
Yeah, so the question was, with Gatsby and Drupal, like, you're still using GraphQL and the JSON API. So like, how does GraphQL talk to REST? So the answer is actually a little bit different in that typically what we try to do with kind of like source plugins in Gatsby is we download the data into kind of a local in-memory database within Gatsby, and then queries are run against that. So the GraphQL queries are just kind of being run against the data, like the entity is pulled from Drupal and being stored in Gatsby.
Obvious follow-up question then. What sort of limitations do you start running into when you start talking about really big sites, 4 or 10 gigabyte databases?
Yeah.
Where does scaling become a concern?
No, totally. So yeah, so this approach works quite well for, say, 5,000 entities or whatever. I don't know. It kind of depends exactly when it's going to be a problem. But yeah, for larger sites, the plan is to add kind of like a bulk sync module to Drupal so that we can kind of bypass the JSON API. Instead of like querying individual entities, we would just say, give me everything. And then on subsequent builds, you could just say, give me everything that's changed since the last date. And then that module would then be responsible for kind of maintaining kind of a cache of the data. So even very, very large sites, it'd be pretty fast to stream over the data from them.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon me for raising my hand watching me run, but I do have a question. You went through a lot of what Gatsby is great at, but can you go over what Gatsby maybe shouldn't be used for, or we shouldn't try to force Drupal into Gatsby?
So Gatsby can be used for a lot of stuff, and so Anyway, so there's a lot of things I could mention that it's not. Anyway, there's a lot of things great at, a lot of things that it's like still a work in progress, whatever. Generally speaking, Gatsby can be used for anything. Like in pretty much any website, any app-like thing, whatever. It's like a React app, so you can do any sort of like app-like thing that you want to do. It hooks up to almost any data source that you can imagine. So as long as you can get data in, and then you can build whatever you want. Where kind of the difficulties arise is the integrations between the data source and Gatsby, and potentially breaking any workflows that people maintaining the content are used to. So kind of typical things that people want when they're like, if you're a non-technical person maintaining content for a website, you want to see like a preview of like, okay, I'm changing a bunch of stuff. Like, what is the site going to look like before it goes live? And the other thing is that it needs to go live in a timely manner, because if you like save something and you have no idea when it's going to be deployed, that can be kind of annoying. And so those are kind of the two major focuses, like between like Drupal and Gatsby, and then other kind of data sources that Gatsby integrates with. Major focuses to improve. And so, so right now, Drupal and Gatsby, like we have a preview. I was going to show a demo of that, but ran out of time. But if you talk to like Shane, for example, he can show you a demo later, or I can show you a demo too. And so there is a preview, but there's still some roughness there. So it's not kind of like a drop-in replacement for Drupal's preview just yet. Also, just like I was talking about, like larger sites start to be an issue. But yeah, I mean, the expectation is that we're going to be adding like incremental builds, which will speed up, the build time a lot. And then with Drupal, adding kind of like a sync type module will enable us to work with almost any size Drupal site. So, with more people using Drupal and Gatsby together, the problems will kind of resolve themselves. But it's very usable right now. So like, MediaCurrent.com is a Gatsby Drupal site. It has like a ton of pages. It's extremely fast. Our work speaks for itself. Like Third and Grove, they just launched recently on Gatsby. So you can already build incredible stuff with this combination. I think it's more like larger sites that start to become a difficulty.
So, how do you see Kyle?
Hold on. Use the mic. Oh, we got one over here.
Oh, yeah, I think, yeah, he's probably
Yeah, how do you handle site search or search of subsets of sites like resources and blog searches, but then not a whole site search?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so a really common solution is using Algolia. Like Algolia pairs really nicely, as you can like send data from a bunch of sources there and then set up kind of like client-side search, and it's really fast. Like, here you're just like Drupal, and then boom, So the type of search, I mean, it's a very world-class kind of search that you can set up. It's very customizable.
Anything with like facets,
Yeah, Acquia, or not Acquia, Algolia. Algolia can do faceted search as well. We're actually going to move to that fairly soon. So it's just like an API. You send the query and it sends back results, and then the results have metadata on it, and then you can use the metadata to build facets if you like.
I guess there's probably a React with Solar.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can use Solar, you can use Elasticsearch, you can use Algolia. You could probably even use Drupal's built-in search. I don't know if it's exposed over JSON API, but if it is, you can use that from React as well. Yeah.
You must have known I was going to ask about Object. So how do you see collaboration going with Drupal and WordPress optimized hosting providers? What does that kind of roadmap kind of look like with joining forces or kind of combining efforts with them?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, they like everyone else, I think, sees just the trends, the kind of websites people want to build, and the difficulties in doing that with kind of vanilla WordPress or Drupal, etc. So yeah, I mean, we've been approached by a number of kind of Drupal/WordPress hosting companies who are interested in kind of exploring a kind of decoupled hosting model where, you know, they host like Drupal or WordPress and then connect, you know, tightly to kind of Gatsby Cloud, where we kind of handle like the preview and then the builds, and then the two of them, anyway, so it'd be pretty, like the goal being like it'd be a pretty seamless experience. So I think there's a ton of potential in that mode. As like Drupal, I mean, Drupal's strength has always been just the flexibility of like content modeling and just the module system and like how easy it is to build kind of a custom CMS for kind of very specific needs of an organization. And kind of, you know, decoupling, like removing the front end kind of allows Drupal to kind of really play to its strengths and then also combine kind of best of breed kind of front end technologies with Gatsby. So I think there's like a lot of potential for people who are kind of like exploring this like headless decoupled world to adapt Drupal with kind of like a strong story from the different like hosting vendors. Yeah, over there.
Hi. How do you manage something like paragraphs where the data structure of the entity can change on the fly?
With what service, sorry?
Paragraphs.
Oh, paragraphs. So generally, I guess I'm not familiar exactly with a scenario like that. So generally speaking, yeah, you need to keep the data structures similar, or if it's changing, like you might have to change like your code. Exactly how does the data?
So
Can you give me specifics?
You can define reusable components within an entity.
Mm-hmm.
So the editor author can decide they want 10 pictures in this one, maybe they want 4 content blocks. So the editor can kind of control the data structure of a given entity on the fly.
Right. Yeah, so how that be expressed within the Drupal JSON API and then the Gatsby, kind of like the Gatsby GraphQL schema is, I believe like it just exposes like relationships. So you can say like, oh, here's this thing and then it has these relationships and then it sort of like points towards a bunch of different stuff. And so when you're creating the page component and writing the query for that, you would just say, here's all the different things that somebody could put in this. And then you would query all those. And then in the React component, you would just say, if this data exists, you know, then render it out here. If the data exists here, then render it out there, whatever. And so it just sort of account for the different types.
I've got kind of a follow-up to that.
Yeah.
Because we ran into that issue because we use paragraphs and we like some flexibility on how to arrange paragraphs on the page. So the short answer for how our people figured it out was fragments in GraphQL.
Yeah.
And so we've got like a Gatsby starter that we use that shows you can download or look at, that shows you kind of our approach so that they can still have a flexible way of arranging paragraphs on the page. But yeah, we did kind of stumble on that initially of like, how do we do that? Because it's like more dynamic.
Yeah.
That's like the short answer.
Yeah, and typically there's limits to how flexible it can be, so you can sort of account for it fairly easily within the component.
One quick follow-up to that too. The third row site is open source and uses paragraphs as well. So if you go to GitHub, go to the third row, you can see all the source for how we're handling that same situation. Very similar to the way we interface them.
Sort of a follow-up question on all of this, and maybe that's more for the room than for Kyle. How do you get metadata into Gatsby? You know, all the good stuff that we get out of Drupal, is that on JSON API and easy to bring into Gatsby? Mm-hmm. What's the experience there?
Yeah, I can just show you actually real quick. So this is the example Drupal site. So if you look at, you know, the article, there's just like, yeah, there's all these different, basically anything that Drupal has available gets exposed into Gatsby. And if there's a field that's not exposed, then that would be a bug that we'd want to fix. But yeah, you can like just query all these things.
Well, like you're only limited by what JSON API puts out there. So if, you know, if JSON API isn't exporting, like I don't recall if it exports meta tags out of the box. Maybe that's a follow-up I need to ask Damien about. But anything like that, it would be, oh, you know, why doesn't graph have this data? Okay, well, let's see what JSON API is putting out there. You know, then that's where you follow up to find out, you know, whatever you're trying to do. As long as it's in the JSON API, you can query it.
Yeah, the JSON API is being very actively developed, so if you do find something that's missing, you can probably get it fixed relatively quickly.
So my question is about sorting dynamic content, sort of maybe as a stopgap for having that instant build time you're talking about. So is there any existing support right now to require page fetch data directly from that JSON API? So if you have like earlier Mark used an example of like a headline, a news headline on a site that we would want to fetch every time the page is loaded. Is there any sort of existing functionality to do that, or is that what you want the developer to wire up?
So you'd have like the client keep refetching?
Yes, essentially. So you would maybe indicate that some of that data, you know, when you're in your React component, should be dynamically fetched from the JSON API rather than rendering it out just a single time.
Yeah, so you definitely always have that option to do that. If you truly need it to be like a real-time, you know, sort of thing, you can hit the JSON API directly. The goal with incremental builds, though, is that, you know, even if like somebody fixes a typo and they click save, you know, it's going to be live within, you know, a few seconds is the goal. So typically speaking, you wouldn't want to do that, but there could be cases where you're like building up this sort of search thing, and so you want to like have a React component that lets people, select, like build up some sort of search query and then like sends that query off to the JSON API to get data. So that sort of thing is definitely very doable if you need to do. But the advantage of not doing that is that you're not having to hit your Drupal instance all the time. By pre-building like the views, you only have to build it once and then it's pushed out to a CDN. So it's much more scalable and much faster. So the preference is whenever you don't need to kind of dynamically fetch things from the API that you don't.
So is that incremental build process? Is that what we should be looking for that have support? It sounded like that was a work in progress.
Yeah, it is a work in progress, but it's like close to being launched, work in progress sort of thing. Next month or two is that expected to be live.
This is going to be the last question, and then we're going to eat.
Eat?
Just a kind of related follow-up to that is, has anyone done anything yet with kind of sites that have significant amounts of personalized content, whether it's for an authenticated user being able to see stuff that's the profile, things that we might now be running big pipe and some of those other blocks that would be within a site to, again, we need to be personalized beyond the one-time build for a decent-sized community.
So what do you do there? Or?
I'm asking, has anybody done?
Oh, sure. So this is like a logged-in kind of user experience.
Right.
Yeah, when you build a Gatsby site, it's a React app. So once the site loads, you can just have them log in and then do whatever you want at that point. So for example, like our commercial site, like it loads a static HTML, but then it boots up into a React app, and then, you you can go into, oh, actually, Shane right now. Anyways, I was just checking something. I don't normally become you. That's weird. I'll go over here. So if you just be me. Anyways, so yeah, you log into the dashboard, and it's like, it knows I'm logged in. It sends off a GraphQL query to our backend to get data about my sites and whatever. So it's just like an app at that point.
So all that data is being loaded, like all of your user data is sitting around statically loaded, or is that actually go back to something like a JSON API?
Yeah, we have our own API that we pull this from. So yeah. So every Gatsby site starts as, it loads first like an HTML version of the page, but then it loads the JavaScript to kind of make it live. And from then on, and that's why it's like, media current. That's why like clicking around is so fast, is that, once it loads, it's a React app. And so clicking on this link, there's no going back to the server. It's just a client-side transition. And that's because it's React. But because it's React, and it's all running, and you can modify the presentation if you want. So you can inside your component, you can say, if user is logged in, show this now, that sort of thing. Or whatever it is you want. And you can also have routes that are client only. So it's only something you visit after you've logged in, and it's not like a pre-rendered thing. Cool. So
Well, that's awesome.
it.
Can we give Kyle a great round of applause?